Thank you for singing so beautifully. It's wonderful to see. I'm the grandfather, and we have the parents, and we have the children. We have several generations, and it's wonderful to see so many generations coming up in this teaching and to see God's light in their eyes. This is the most important thing. I feel I'm sort of fading out of the picture now, but I see that what I've left is life, and I'm very happy for that. The play last night was the best we've ever done by far, and it was extremely good. Devaki deserves all praise for it. Where is she? There she is, okay. But everybody deserves praise. They understood their parts perfectly and played them perfectly. You know, it's interesting. When I was writing that scene of the Lords, where they were acting so villainous, and yet all their arguments were airtight. You couldn't break them. And I couldn't help thinking that I enjoyed writing those parts. And I thought that God, who is the cosmic playwright, probably enjoys writing the part of Satan, because he knows it's all a dream. Nothing's real about it. But if he's going to do a job of deluding people, he has to do a very good job, and he does. And it seems so real until you get out of it and you thought, well, my God, what was that excitement all about? But their arguments were airtight, as I said. They made perfect sense, and yet you knew they were wrong. And this is the argument of wisdom versus Maya. But I've always had this thought, I suppose we've all been born with certain talents, and writing was, I suppose, mine. I've never taken seriously any other talent, and I've had to work at not taking seriously that talent, because I remember when I was 7 years old, my parents criticized something I had written for a paper for my school, and said it had too many ands in it. Well, of course they were right. And I knew that they were right, and I didn't argue with them. But what surprised me was my instinctive reaction was, who are you to tell me how to write? And then I knew that they were right, so I let it go. But at the age of 9, I was writing dialogue already. And I wrote this play of last night when I was 15. However, before you make any gasp of surprise, the real play was written much later. What I wrote at 15, however, was the essence of it. It was in 1941 when World War II was raging in Europe, and Japan had not yet invaded America, but it did in 1941 in December. And I had the scene set on in the Neanderthal times of cavemen. And there were 5 clans, as we had in the play, and one of them had risen up to defeat the other 4, and the Lord, who was the general of the 4 clans, united clans, after it was over and he beat the warrior of the bad clan, decided that he wanted to create a peace treaty that would ensure peace for all time. And the same thing happened, that they all were very applauding of it and approved of it. However, this little exception needs to be made. That little exception needs to be made. In the end, it was completely in shreds, the whole peace treaty. And then my attitude as a 15-year-old was much less hopeful than now. And I had the Lord, who was defending the general who was in favor of a peace treaty, saying, maybe it isn't God's will that we live in peace. And in the background you heard shouts and arrows and then guns and finally bombs and then one great bomb and silence. And this was my view at that age. However, at that same age, I came up with the idea of communities as the solution to it. And at that time, too, I thought of communities as something that we would be able to have to offer the world when the world bombed itself back to the caves. Because I still saw the world really going through much harder times than we've even gone through now. I believed that we would go through hard times still. And I still believe it. Master spoke of it. And I think we need to be prepared. But my idea at the time was that we would create a community. I thought of going to Patagonia, way in the south of Argentina, where nobody would notice us, and we would be able to bring civilization back to the world. And I thought of having specialists in this community of engineers and all sorts of different people who would be able to keep the lamp of civilization on all levels going and revive society. Well, my ideas in that respect, too, have been greatly sophisticated and improved. But at that time, I was very enthusiastic, and I have a nature that when I get enthusiastic about it, everybody gets enthusiastic. I remember saying to Dayamata that, you want to bring me my briefcase? I remember saying to Dayamata that, thank you.
A new copy.
Thank you. That you could put me in, give me the job of washing toilets if you like, but I can only say this, that if you give me that job, it'll become the most desired job at Mount Washington. Because whenever I get enthusiastic, everybody sort of gets into it. So I got all my friends enthusiastic about this idea of community and going off to Patagonia and creating a new civilization and so on, until they found I was serious. Then I was the only one left holding the bag. But I still had this desire. And I studied many communities, and I looked into what had caused communities to succeed and others to fail. And then gradually I reached the point of understanding that community alone will not bring what man wants. I had been all my life looking for ways to help humanity, help everybody understand how to find what they're looking for, truth. And I remember at the age of 13, I identified truth with science. And I decided to become an astronomer. And we started an astronomy club in my school in England. And I made a 6-inch telescope, a mirror telescope, and I almost had it finished when it slipped from the table and cracked. And I'm afraid that killed my enthusiasm at the age of 13. But I had the idea then that the truth I was looking for would have to be scientific truth, something that is proved rationally. And then I came to realize that that isn't the truth I want. I want a truth that will make me feel joy. What's the use of knowing a lot of facts, whether the universe has 1 billion or 100 billion galaxies or 200 billion cannot make any real difference in our lives. What matters to us is whether we feel joy in that vision, yes, but if we don't feel joy, what are facts? And so I started looking for other ways of helping humanity, and I thought of communism, and I thought maybe that's the answer, until I saw that they imposed their values on people and killed those who didn't agree with them. And during the Second World War, many of the people I had known were sent to concentration camps in the Gulag in Russia when the Russians came into Romania, and I knew that was not the answer. And I saw that systems will not make people better. They have to be better themselves. They have to improve themselves. And so I thought, well, maybe we can improve them through the arts and through music and poetry and drama. And I'd always had this wish to be a dramatist, so I thought in those terms until I came to realize that that's not going to give people what they want. Look at Shakespeare. He's the greatest dramatist we have produced in the West, except for the Greek ones, but I think he's greater than the Greeks, frankly. And yet, how many people's lives have been changed by Shakespeare? He's been reduced to college debates and arguments. He hasn't really changed anybody, except for a few words that he uttered that were wise. And I realized that that's not the answer. And I've told you the story about how one night I was studying to be a playwright. I was in Charleston, South Carolina, at the Dock Street Theater, and I wanted to learn stagecraft. And what really turned me away from that was being with other actors and seeing how totally false their values were. And I remember I roomed with 4 of them, and I went out one night into the night and asked myself, everything I keep doing in trying to find where truth is, it all comes back to this word God. What can God be? That there must be some reality in this God. He can't just be some vague abstraction. And I remember it was a very important evening in my life where I asked myself, what could God be if he is a God? I said, well, first of all, he can't be just a judge or a policeman waiting for us to make a mistake so he can clap us into hell. That doesn't make any sense at all. And I asked, well, where is this intelligence coming from that makes me ask the question about him? And I said, what is consciousness? What gives me the consciousness to ask the question, what is consciousness? Science is not going to tell me what consciousness is, because it takes consciousness to think about consciousness. Descartes was wrong when he said, I think, therefore I am, because you can't know that you are, you can't even think unless you know that you are. Our knowledge of being, our knowledge of consciousness is an intuition. It's not something you can ever define, because you have to use consciousness to define it. And definitions are a small little part of understanding. And then I thought, well, self-consciousness too must be a part of that picture. And so he must be an infinite consciousness, of which our consciousness and our little brains are only little manifestations, that we don't produce consciousness with our brains, but we manifest it through our brains to function in a limited way. But that consciousness has to be everywhere, and everything has to be a manifestation of that consciousness. I was so staggered by these incredible insights. I remember I went home, I was just dizzy, and my 4 roommates were in the kitchen joking and laughing, and I was very serious. And they said, what's the matter with old Don? He's always so serious, thinking about things, yuck, yuck, yuck. And I just thought, what fools. Can't they see life has a purpose? And that was what I finally decided. I must give my life to God. And I didn't know how to find him. And I went to the churches, and I found they didn't give me anything that I wanted. I had already told my mother I wouldn't go to church anymore because it wasn't giving me truth. It was giving me different people's opinions of truth, and I didn't think them wise people at all. And I didn't know who was wise. I'd never met anybody wise. I had a godfather who was fairly wise, but he wanted me to be a professor in a college. And I thought, what on earth? I left college because it was so stupid. It taught truths that were not truths. It was mere opinions. I remember taking a poetry book to philosophy class because the philosophy class was so dull, so superficial. And so I didn't know, but then I tried to read the Bible. I went up from Charleston, South Carolina to, my father had already been sent to Cairo, Egypt, on a petroleum mission to find oil in Egypt. And in fact, they found oil where he said it would be, although his own company decided to pull out. But we had rented our house out, and we were staying in White Plains near Scarsdale. And I was sort of helping Mother to get ready to go to join Dad in Cairo. And I found a book on her shelf called The Short World Bible. And I read excerpts from the different scriptures. And when I read excerpts from the Vedanta, I was moved. Here I found a teaching that was not one person, but cosmic. Here I found a teaching that said you must experience truth. It's not enough to believe it. I thought, that's for me. It fitted my belief in science. And then I read the Bhagavad Gita, where it said that if you want to know God, you must go to a solitary place and meditate on me. And I had always wanted to go off and be a hermit. Master told me I'd been one in many lives in the past. And I had this deep desire. And I remember when I was a 14-year-old telling my mother I was thinking of going off and getting a place in the mountains. And she said, oh, good, we can live together there and I can write and you can write. And I thought, no, that's not what I mean. I didn't say anything. But when I read this, I thought, well, that's for me. I must do this. And I didn't know anything about India. I had some sort of dream of getting a good tanned skin and going to India and melting into the crowd there and not being noticed. But it seemed too far away and too romantic. And I thought it was more realistic to go to South America where the land is cheap and I would just live there and be a hermit. But I didn't know what to do as a hermit. And I remember when it spoke about meditating on me, I remember sitting on my bed cross-legged and cross-eyed and getting absolutely nowhere and not knowing what it was all about and thinking, I need help. And who can help me? Nobody. And then when I put my mother on the ship to go to Cairo, the same day that I put her on the ship, I went uptown New York and found Autobiography of a Yogi, and that book completely changed my life. And it didn't at all resonate with my reason on certain levels. I mean, on page 8, let's face it, Lahiri Mahasaya materializing in a wheat field is a bit much for somebody who's never heard of miracles at all. My mother used to talk about the miracles saints have performed. I said, Mother, don't be ridiculous. And yet, when he talked about it, I couldn't disbelieve it because my heart knew that he was right. My heart knew that he knew what he was talking about. And I just took the next bus virtually from New York to Los Angeles. And the first words I addressed to him were, I want to be your disciple. It's an interesting thing, because I know that I have a certain role in his work, and it's a unique role. And I might as well declare that fact. Even when he accepted me that day, and he accepted me immediately, I mean within half an hour, and he came out onto the stage afterwards, and there was a certain pride in his voice when he said, we have a new brother. He had been waiting for me, I know that. He said to me, you have a great work to do. And I never took that as a compliment. I took it as a duty, as a responsibility. But I've always understood that. He said many times, but he always said it in private. And I used to wonder why he said it so quietly. One day after his passing, the monks were meditating with Rajarshi, and when I came up to get his blessing, he said in such a soft tone of voice that only I could hear him, Master has a great work to do through you, Walter, and he will give you the strength to do it. But he didn't want anybody else to hear it. And I sometimes wondered why he wanted to keep it secret. I remember one time at the desert, we were walking together, just the two of us, and he said, apart from St. Lin, which is what he called him during his lifetime, apart from St. Lin, every man has disappointed me, and you mustn't disappoint me. And he spoke with such power. And I knew he wasn't saying that his men disciples had disappointed him spiritually, because he had some great men disciples too, apart from St. Lin. But what he was saying is that in order to get this message spread, it takes masculine energy. It is interesting to see the difference between men and women, because it's wrong for either to say that it's superior. I remember there was a woman in India who said to me recently, about a year ago, let's face it, women are more intelligent than men. And I just didn't argue the point. But the point is that they're two sides of a single coin. You can't claim either side is more valuable than the other. They have the same value, but they have complementary purposes. And each is intelligent in a different way. Each thinks in a different way. Even the sex organs are outward in the case of men and inward in the case of women. And so men are more in the position of conquering, of organizing, of dealing with things outwardly. Women are more in the position of adapting, of nurturing. Their sexual organs are their breasts, and they nurture. And thank you. And the role of women is complementary to that of men, but it's not less important. Either one without the other would be insufficient. It's interesting, Master told us that he was William the Conqueror, and I used to wonder, why would he have been such a role? As I mentioned the other day, I grew up under the English system of education, and we used to read Our Island Story every year. And in this story, William figured as a villain. The Harold was considered the hero. And it turns out that my guru was the villain. And this hero was really not a good man at all. But it was a very interesting contrast. And I naturally was very interested in reading about his life in depth. And I've since then got Catherine writing his life. And it's fascinating. But I had the intuition many years ago. Master didn't tell me I was Henry. It would have been a mistake for him to tell me. But Henry was his real successor. His oldest son, whom he had to leave in charge at least of the Duchy of Normandy, he was a traitor. And even when William was on his deathbed, Robert Curthose was organizing a rebellion against him in league with the King of France. And he was a traitor, and in this life also he was a traitor. He was Swami Dhirananda, who betrayed Master. Master acted at the time as if it was the greatest shock you could imagine, but in truth, back when Shoila Shuta said when she went to, Sister Shoila Shuta went to India, and Tulsi Bose, who was a childhood friend of Master's, just as Dhirananda had been, and he said, Master said when we were teenagers together that someday Dhirananda will betray me and marry a white woman, and all this happened, and he knew. But, you know, when you see a movie the second time, you sort of pretend you didn't see it so that it's always a shock. And so the masters know what's coming, but they go through it again without that, oh yeah, I know what's coming. I went to a movie once with a young girl who was in our group, and she had that irritating tendency to want to tell us everything that was going to happen because she's seen it before. We just wished she'd shut up. Well, anyway, Master knew about it, but he had to go through the show. And he said it would take him 2 or 3 more lives for Dhirananda to overcome that karma and to be freed of it. Whether he said more in the nature of that freedom, this I do not know for sure. But the thing is that as his disciples, we've had to go through so many different lives. And learned so many lessons. It takes a long time, even after coming on the path, to understand what life is all about and to understand that you really do want only God. That's why when I look at our members of Ananda and the choir up here singing and the people acting in the peace treaty yesterday, it's thrilling to my heart to see how many of you really are pure souls. I do not see much ego in this community. I see a sincere desire to find God. I think that Master has given me a wonderful family, and I'm grateful for it. But in the life of this lifetime, and in the life of William, his second son, William Rufus, he couldn't give the kingdom of England to Curthose, because Curthose, as I said, was a traitor. He had to give it to his second son. And in giving it to him, he gave it to one who was completely loyal to him, but didn't know what he meant by loyalty. To him, he was just another king with his own self-aggrandizement. He had no understanding of William's having a mission. William, in fact, had a very important mission. There are several things that help to understand that. One is that he created the only country in medieval times that would survive the medieval system. He did it partly by making every member of the country pledge allegiance to the king, not to his local baron, so that the barons, if they rose in rebellion and revolt against the king, would still be in a position of not being able to command the loyalty of their followers. The followers still had pledged first allegiance to the king, and so the country was held together. Whereas in Europe there was nothing but chaos as Lord beat Lord, and that had been the case in England. In many ways, William founded not only the English system and the English Empire, but England's is the oldest single government in the world to continue from that time till this. And it was two people who organized that country. William established it, William organized it, conquered it, and then Henry established it. And it required that time for Henry to grow up into an understanding of, well, these jerks aren't doing what he wanted. What did he want? And when he was finally made king of England, he had the understanding of William's mission completely established in himself. And although Henry was the most powerful king in Western Europe at that time, he didn't do what any of the other kings do. He didn't try to conquer new territory for himself. He only had one ambition, and that was to establish his father's system as he had tried. The only warring that he did was to win back territory that had been lost by the ineptitude of his older brothers. But he didn't try to conquer any other territory. He didn't have any interest in himself. He had no personal motivation. There's an interesting thing that happens when people don't have personal motives. People look to see what dark motives they may be concealing. And that's why with William, they were all looking for his dark motives. He had no motive. He was preparing something that would survive into Dwapara Yuga. He was sent by God to establish a system that would help the whole world to grow into a new kind of energy. And this is what his life has been in this age also. He had no personal motivation. And if you look at Henry, you'll see that he didn't have any either. He was only motivated by a desire to establish his father's work. And this has been my only motive. I haven't cared for anything else. So naturally I've been accused of all the darkest motives possible. And on the witness stand, I've been accused of having this big bank account in Switzerland and this big money thing and this power thing. I haven't been interested in any of that. The only money I saved from my parents' inheritance was to put $10,000 into an account in Switzerland so that if I ever became a burden to people in Switzerland, I could draw on that money. And here this became this big secret bank account, which I was building on Ananda money. Never. I only gave money. I never took money. But naturally people will think, if you are that way, that there's some dark motive involved. You just have to understand that this is human nature. I don't think of people as having attacked me or accused me or tested me or anything. I think, what tests? It's all been a part of the play. It doesn't matter. But the thing is that in this life too, there has had to be that hiatus between Master's passing and an understanding of what his life really was all about. And we see this now. And the peace treaty yesterday was a very interesting explanation of this whole Dwapara Yoga philosophy. You have this emphasis not on individual leaders, but on the quality of consciousness of people. This was the understanding I came to when I understand that you cannot change the world by developing the leaders. But then I understood further that it has to come from a mass upliftment of consciousness. And this you can only do by inspiring people to be better than they are. No system is going to make them better. The communist system, kill everybody who doesn't agree with us, that's not going to do it. You can't force people to agree to a system. No system is going to make you better. Master put me in charge of the monks, and I tried my best to create a system, but I knew it wasn't going to work, and it didn't work. I had to compromise, because I used to meditate 6 hours a day, but there were other monks who were meditating not at all. And I thought, we've got to compromise and do some sort of a thing that will ensure that they all meditate at least a little bit every day. And so I gave up my own meditation to be with them and meditate longer. Then when I was put in charge of the centers of the SRF in the world, I tried to create a system that would ensure that if one center leader leaves the work or moves away or something, that the center doesn't depend upon the leader. It will go on without him. And I did my best to create a system that would work. Finally, I had to admit defeat. Systems don't work. We had Kamala Silva, who was in charge of our center in Oakland, California. Hers was the best center in the whole world. And yet when she withdrew, when she retired, it became one of the worst. I had to face the fact that the spirit of the leadership is important. And therefore the spirit of the leadership, how do you bring about the right kind of leadership? Well, I've found that it comes through looking for people who don't want to be leaders. I talked about this at length on Monday. Looking for people who want to serve others. Looking for people who want to overcome their own egos and therefore don't become all the more egotistical because they're leaders. They don't think of leadership as an important position. They think of it as just a particular talent that some people have and other people do not. But with that spirit of proper leadership, I have found that we have been able to create very good communities. But we have not done it in a system of democracy, because democracy too has great liabilities. First of all, the majority will always vote for what will give them what will be most interesting to in their terms. So you find that a democracy will always vote for the people who promise them the most. And in promising them all these things, the leaders have to produce in some way. They almost always break their promises, but to the extent that they try to fulfill them, they can only tax people so much, and they can only do the work that they promise to do with money. So where are they going to get that money? The only possible way is to stamp more money, print more money. And so it is, you have inflation. And the dollar today is worth about 10 cents back in 1945. It has been going on slowly, and we sort of take it for granted. But there come little slips in time with such inflationary periods when suddenly it gets out of hand. And this whole inflationary system now is just about to spiral into a destructive down period of real hyperinflation and depression. I mean, what's the difference between depression and hyperinflation? In the one, you don't have money, and the other, the money you have isn't worth anything. But we're coming to such a period, and I want you all to understand. And the answer to that is to band together in small communities and be self-sufficient. I'm so pleased that we have young people now coming and wanting to do this. I would like to suggest to you all that you come to India and help us to build the work there. We have a lot to do, and we're building a community, a new community there. And whereas I want it to be an Indian community, we can start with American energy and gradually move it over. Just as when I was a young boy, a child, I got a bicycle for my birthday, and I decided I would teach all the children in the area to ride a bicycle. And what I did, I was hold the seat and the handlebar and run with them. And when I found that they were able to keep their balance, then I let go the handlebar and kept the seat. And then when I saw they were doing it on their own, then I let go the seat but ran with them so they knew that I could catch them. And then when they understood that they were doing it without me, then they took off. And this is how I have tried to build Ananda, to make it such that you all can take over from me. I've never been the kind of leader who says, well, I know what to do it, I'm going to do it. No, I do know, but I want to teach you how to do it. And if you don't make mistakes, how will you learn? I have to give you the opportunity to make your own mistakes. I have to give you the opportunity to make your own blunders. And I've allowed it. Only when I saw that it was disastrous, I stepped in. But otherwise, I've tried my best to let people learn from their own experience. And I've seen that some people will not learn, and therefore I've removed them from positions of authority. And other people I've moved to different positions over the years. Now we have a very solid group of people leading our communities, but not driving them. There's a very big difference. I got a letter from Satya Sai Baba many years ago, handwritten in his own hand, in which he said, it is easy to drive, but difficult to lead. And this is what I've tried to do. So with you young people who want to come and join and start communities, I would urge you to come to India first, and we can help get things going there. And the Indians, just as in Italy, the Italians at first, they were very family-oriented. Their family was their true community. And over a bit of time, people began to understand that this Ananda community was their true family. Because what is a family? I mean, you've got brother suing brother. You've got parents not being taken care of by their children. You've got so many problems. It's a good system that nature has provided, but it doesn't work as well as community can, where you have people gathered together who really share the same ideals and principles and work together for a particular goal and intention to know God together. There is nothing more wonderful in this world than a group of people wanting God together and not wanting them because of rules. When Master put me in charge of the monks, he said, don't make too many rules. It destroys the spirit. After he passed away, I tried to create a system in the office that would make it possible for letters to be answered quickly. And it took me 1.5 years to install this system because I realized that this department depended on that department, and so on. And so to get even the correspondence department organized, I had to organize the whole office. And after a while, the women in the office, they were all women then, they were saying, well, finally we're getting organized. And oh my God, it was the worst thing I ever did. Every week a new rule would come on our bulletin board. And I began to feel suffocated. This isn't the way to go. You can't do it through rules. I kept trying to do it in principle and spirit. And when he put me in charge of the monks, I said to the monks, I know that it's traditional for the head monk to demand obedience of those under him. I do not demand obedience from anyone. I demand cooperation, and I will cooperate with you too. If ever you ask anything of me, if it doesn't go against my conscience, I will do that. And in that spirit, I built those monks. But then gradually the spirit of organization crept in, and I began to feel that I don't belong here. What's the matter with me? I thought it must be me. But it just, I remember I used to say to Daya, I gave up my living quarters to live with this dormitory of 15 men just to keep the peace at night instead of having pillow fights and so on. And I said to Daya, we need a monastery. We need a place where the men can live, where they can have their own quarters. And she said, well, we don't have any money. So I said, all right, by my will, I will earn the money. And I knew I didn't have the money. I mean, my income was $15 a month. Well, I got the idea while I had that income to get a gem bangle. And, a gem bangle is not a cheap thing. But I just was sure that God would give me the money if I wanted it, and it came. But the thing is that I started these businesses with that same affirmation, knowing that I wouldn't earn it, but that if I put that energy out, the money would come somehow. And I would earn $500 here and lose $500 there, and people laughed at me. But I said, I knew what I was doing. I knew that it was energy, consciousness, affirmation. That was what was important. And then Doris Duke gave us $80,000, and Daya said, well, now we have the money. And she thought she'd earned the money, and I thought I'd earned the money. And we were both right. But she then said, all right, this money will go toward the monastery. At least if I hadn't been putting out that energy toward a monastery, she wouldn't have directed it that way. But then when they started developing this monastery, it was just, I'd been the one to put out all the energy. I even bought a picture to hang there. It was, at $15 a month allowance, you're not going to get enough money to buy beautiful paintings, but it was a beautiful copy and very small, and I wanted to hang it on the wall just as an affirmation. We're getting this place. They said, we will decide the pictures to be hung there. And from then on, I had absolutely no say in what they would do. They went to a motel company and got a design. I had got an architect to design this beautiful place. I don't think it would have cost any more, but they got this hotel with 2 levels and stairs going up and a balcony, and I just was heartbroken. And Daya said to me, don't worry, we'll make it beautiful. Make a flat side and we'll put a lotus figure on the front. I thought, God, if this is good taste, I don't know what to talk about. Finally, at the end, we were given the choice to be able to decide on the furniture for our own bedrooms. And I had that. I and Anandamayi and a couple of others. I was so crushed that I was eager to go to India by that time. Master had planned to take me to India, and I didn't want anything to do with it. It just was no longer my thing. And when I got to India and I found that spirit, I got it from Anandamayi Ma, I got it from the country. This thought of, it isn't the institutions that make you find God, it's the individual. You have to have this desire for God. You have to have this personal longing. Master used to say, you have to individually make love to God. He can't come through an organization. It must come through individual desire. And so my desire from then on was to organize in a way that would help the individual to grow. Well, this has been the basis on which I have founded Ananda. I needed those years to grow up into this understanding. But when I built Ananda, I decided that we must be decentralized. We mustn't have a mother church. We mustn't have a mother center with everything dependent on that. And the general consciousness being that if you live at the mother center, you know more than anyone else. Of course you don't know more. People who are on the scene will know more. The organization of Ananda is a very different kind. And this is what I would like to spread through the world. Autonomous communities united by a spirit of oneness. But in that spirit of oneness, we still can take people from different communities. I've asked Asha if she would release a couple of people from Palo Alto for other communities, and I've taken from that poor couple, the Pravers, so often I feel badly. But what can I do? These are the people who can do it. They're the right ones for it. And you have to work with the individuals. It all comes down to self-realization. Master started Self-Realization Fellowship, and there is a need for a certain church, a certain organization, otherwise it would become scattered. We need it too. If it were not that, it would be scattered. But we need to do it in the right way. And he gave me the clue when he said, don't make too many rules, otherwise it destroys the spirit. And I have seen that Ananda's spirit is flourishing, but it isn't flourishing in SRF. I talked to a couple of the monks at Lake Shrine just a couple of weeks ago, and it was a painful experience for me. I said, why is it that in nearly 50 years I have yet to hear one inspiring story come out of SRF? Why? There should be hundreds of them. Well, to me, an inspiring story means somebody renouncing his ego for the welfare of somebody else, somebody being generous at his own expense, somebody being kind even when it's a pain for him to be kind, someone forgiving even when an act is not forgivable. Acts of humility, acts of generosity, all these attitudes. And the answer Vishwananda gave me, what do you mean, no spirit? Look at all the members we're getting. Does that have anything to do with spirit? Have they understood the beginning of the spiritual path? And then they said to me this isn't what I wanted. Well, never mind. Lakshman, did you print this up? Yeah, that's what I didn't want you to do. Oh, well. Okay, never mind. They actually insulted me to the point of saying that I had put Master's name on my books in order to give them wider promotion. I said to them, Master himself told me to edit his books. But because they weren't the way they thought, Chidananda's a librarian, he doesn't know Master's teachings. And here he was telling me how to edit Master's teachings. I finally decided that I'm going to print in a new book of mine, which is coming out in November. It's called Religion in the New Age, and it has also chapters on different essays. And one of these essays is an analysis of their editing of the first stanza of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And it's amazing how inept their editing is. It's adolescent. And I thought I'd just read you well, I don't know if I have the time, but I'll read you a few little examples. Editing is a very different process from writing. Certain of my brother disciples had the temerity recently, no, it is here, it is what I wanted, had the temerity to melt... I'm wrong. Had the temerity to tell me recently that I didn't so much edit our Guru's writings in the books I have put in his name as write my own books and attach his name to them for the sake of wider circulation. I found their allegations so deeply offensive that I've decided to publish an analysis I made many years ago of my own editing versus theirs, of a single quatrain from Yogananda's explanation of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, 3 versions of the first Rubai or quatrain with critical commentary. The purpose of editing is to clarify simply and to make more fluid and easy make more fluid and easy to understand what has been written. When editing, one should never add ideas of his own. As the direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, commissioned by him personally to teach, write, and edit in his name, I have both a right and a duty to present his teachings as clearly and correctly as I can. And so, thank you, ma'am. That's the spirit. Master wrote in the first Rubaiyat, let me, first of all, because I don't want to read you all 45 pages, that would take you past your lunchtime. Moon of my, last it. Here we are. This is the passage. Awake, for morning in the bowl of night has flung the stone that puts the stars to flight. And lo, the hunter of the east has caught the Sultan's turret in a noose of light. And Master wrote an interpretation of it, and I wrote why I changed some of the phrasing that he did. For example, he wrote the inner silence silently sang. Silent is redundant. Of the 2 thoughts, inner silence and sang, inner silence is the more important. I put it at the end to give it emphasis. The whole sentence, I felt, needed power, especially as it is the opening shot announcing the whole book. I therefore made it a separate paragraph and announced its importance by the word thus. Hence, thus sang the inner silence. Master then followed first with the word awake, as Omar, or Fitzgerald rather, did in the poem, awake for sake of the sleep of ignorance. These words, however, serve not only to explain the words of the poem, they are paraphrased and need first to explain what the reader is being told to awake from. Not, in other words, from normal sleep, but from the sleep of ignorance. To make that point first and then cry awake gives the reader a clearer sense of direction. So much power, indeed, does the sentence have that I gave it the full authority of a separate paragraph of its own. Incidentally, I changed the sleep to your sleep in order to give the phrase greater immediacy. Master ran that sentence on to other thoughts. Forsake the sleep of ignorance for the dawn of wisdom, etc., to the end of the paragraph. For the same reason I gave the first words of this sentence, forsake your sleep of ignorance, awake, also a paragraph of their own. They present a thought to be dwelt on, not hurried past. As for the rest of the paragraph, it needs the separate emphasis I gave it, so that every concept, every image be relished in its full richness. Quote, for the dawn of wisdom has thrown the stone of discipline to break the bowl. I changed this to read, for the dawn of wisdom has flung into the dark bowl of your unknowing the stone of spiritual discipline. The mind puzzles for a moment on reading the first version to ask why wisdom should be throwing stones. After the succeeding explanation, the point becomes clear. But it would be well to spare the reader this brief moment of uncertainty, even of skepticism. This is a minor point, but the sentence reads better if bowl is put first to suggest an object for the reason's otherwise seemingly unreasonable act, though it be only fleetingly so. Thrown the stone, by the way, rhymes in such a way as to seem faintly comical. I changed it back, therefore, to Fitzgerald's flung the stone. To break the bowl of nocturnal unknowing. Nocturnal in Yogananda's version is unclear. Although it is meant to suggest the darkness of spiritual unknowing, this darkness is not yet obvious, and might leave the reader confused between the possibility of darkness as a symbol and the suggestion, stronger to the literal mind, that one's unknowing happens only at night. Or perhaps, so the reader might wonder, there might be some other kind of unknowing that is diurnal. That is to say, which happens only in daylight. The point needs clarifying, not because the intelligent reader can't figure out what is meant, but because the less the mind is left to play with these alternatives, the straighter its arrow of concentration can fly to its real target of meaning. In my version, I left out nocturnal for its possible confusion with the earthly night, and made it instead the dark bowl. For clarity, it is in any case bowl which needs modifying here, since bowl is the image that Omar has presented to describe unknowing. To say bowl and then offer nocturnal as another description of unknowing is weakening to the thought, if not confusing to it. Again, to make it clear that this was a direct, not an abstract teaching, I made it the dark bowl of your unknowing. After all, the whole stanza is a direct exhortation, made more so by Master's paraphrase. It is not an abstract philosophical statement. The next part was difficult. The bowl can easily be understood as the inverted bowl of the sky, and the whole thing offered as a symbol of the sky, of our own consciousness. I had a hard time, however, with the concept of breaking the bowl so as to put one's desires to flight. It seemed to me, especially for the purposes of poetic paraphrase, too elaborate to explain that old mental concepts have to be shattered before new spiritual understanding can shine in. Moreover, while I tried to clarify Master's concepts, it was not my job to add concepts of my own. If he chose not to elaborate this somewhat difficult point, I didn't feel it my place to do so. I therefore decided to leave this concept pretty much as it was, just as Master did. Indeed, it seems to me one can kill the spirit of a poem with too much explanation. Master had an engaging tendency, one that I've kept wherever possible out of sheer delight in the exuberance of his writing, to string adjectives together, and thus to put the star-like, pale, mock-lustered material desires to flight. In this case, however, as in several others, the abundance of adjectives weakened the teaching instead of strengthening them. What I wanted to convey above all was the sense of authority in Master's inspiration. I'm not wholly satisfied with my solution here, but it is the best I could come up with to preserve all the meaning, adding none of my own, and at the same time to make the sentence as clear and spiritually authoritative as possible. I'm not going to go on with my analysis because there's a lot there, but it's really quite an interesting thing. And then when I had thoughts to add, I had a little editorial thoughts afterwards, expanded meaning, and that made it more sense because it helped to clarify why east, for example. Master pointed out in other writings that the sun traveling from east to west influences also the march of civilization. You notice that it began in the Orient, gradually moved over to Europe to America. It'll move over to the Orient again, And so the dawn of awakening moves in the same direction, and this is what was the deeper meaning there. But since he didn't say it in his analysis, I didn't want to say it, but I knew that he meant that, and so I said it in my expanded meaning later on, editorial comments. Well, now I want to read my comments on SRFs, and this will be brief because, as I said, this is quite a long document. I'm only on page 18 of 45 pages. But they say, the SRF edition, Wine of the Mystic, strengthens the first sentence, as my edition did, by giving it a paragraph of its own. The alliterative repetition, the inner silence sings, is weakening, however, not strengthening to the flow. Master's redundancy, the inner silence silently sang, is removed, but alliteration, though a recognized poetic device, needs careful attention lest it defeat its poetic purpose. To refresh the reader's memory, the way I put it was, thus sang the inner silence. The wine of the Mystic, the SRF's edition, changes the tense from past to present. Instead of silently sang and my thus sang, SRF wrote, thus the inner silence sings. The reason for the change is understandable, but I admit to a preference for Master's use of the past tense. With sang, the sentence announces a dramatic event in a person's life. Sings turns it into a suggestion of something that happens repeatedly during the soul's evolution. Again, to reiterate my earlier comment, this sentence is the opening salvo of the entire book. It needs dramatic emphasis. I've already explained why I changed the sleep of ignorance to your sleep of ignorance. Your is more immediate, more admonitory. This is a minor point. SRF either didn't consider it or didn't think it important enough to introduce it. Mine diminishes the sentence of the next clause by saying, forsake the sleep of ignorance, for the dawn of wisdom has come. In this sentence, two important thoughts are weakened by pairing them. It serves rather to introduce another, hurl the hard stone of spiritual discipline that breaks the bowl of dark unknowing. The rhythm is wrong. Where the ending of the sentence, the dawn of wisdom has come, should suggest an open window to further ideas, the rhythm, especially its rhythm, conveys the feeling rather of a slamming door. As I say, I want to go on to some of the better ones here. O inhabitants of the city of delusion, sleep no more. The image of a city of delusion is confusing. First, it implies that the whole city is in delusion, whereas the real purpose of Omar's poem and of Master's explanation of it is to challenge people individually to awake from their delusion. What are they expected to do after they awake? Emigrate? The image is not only confusing, it is self-defeating. A city of delusion raises images in the mind of shadows, darknesses, perhaps of hungry cats prowling in dark alleys. Omar's image, however, is one of light, of the darkness being dispersed. It is not an image of mists waiting for the dawn to dispel them. O inhabitants of the city of delusion, sleep no more. It has already been made clear that the sleep described is a sleep of ignorance. To awaken, however, while still living in the city of delusion, suggests that the city's inhabitants are equally in delusion, whether they are awake or asleep. For one assumes that they must be awake at least half the time in order to pursue their daily round of delusive activities. The reader is given no clear idea of what it means to be either awake or asleep in the city of delusion. Quote, the sunlight of my awakening message of mystic wisdom has arrived. We were given a clearer image by Omar and Master earlier, when it was the sunlight of wisdom itself that did the awakening. Now that image has been weakened by the fact of being presented as a mere message of wisdom. This is the unfortunate consequence of the decision to tell the reader to do the hurling, rather than making it wisdom itself which hurls the stone. Learn how to use the hard stone of discipline. Again, the original image is weakened. The first command, it is at least implied in Master's version, and is stated openly in SRF's, was use the stone. Now we are told, learn how to use the stone. A course of study is implied here. Perhaps classes, lessons, detailed instructions. The immediacy of the original inspiration, which describes action occurring on an intuitive level, is still further distanced by this new call to make an intellectual effort to learn how. Incidentally, the expression hard stone is employed again here. In editing, 2 minuses do not make a plus. The hard stone of spiritual discipline to break the bowl of your dark ignorance, dashing from its hold. I've already gone into reasons for making dark modify bowl rather than ignorance. Another problem now presents itself. To what does its hold refer? To the bowl? To the hand implied, though not mentioned, which holds the bowl? Or does it apply to your dark ignorance, which one visualizes only with difficulty as actually holding anything? The image is muddy. Behold with envy, how the hunter of wisdom has been searching out and gathering, etc. Envy is a spiritual flaw. I can't imagine Master counseling anyone to look on others, even on saints, with envy. What is intended here, of course, is that one should emulate the saints. It should be so stated. Behold with envy how the hunter of wisdom has been searching out and gathering the lofty, kingly, spiritually advanced devotees of truth, encompassing their souls with a halo of the everlasting light of freedom. In addition to the mistaken use of envy, and to the fact they were left wondering whether wisdom is the hunter or the hunted, the whole sentence is burdensome. It adds no new thought to the discussion, and only bewilders the mind. For we had earlier the word kingly applied to egoic pride, or anyway to pride. Now suddenly we find it applied to spiritually advanced devotees of truth. To people, in other words, who don't need awakening, since one assumes they are already awake, or at least well on the way toward spiritual awakening. The image of a lofty minaret was applied first to a spiritual flaw, pride. Now suddenly we find it applied to a high spiritual advancement. The reader no longer knows what to think. The editors would have done better, surely, especially in consideration of the brevity of Master's commentary, to hold to a single image, and not to offer two that conflict actively with one another. Pursued by the compelling commands of their hounding habits, compelling commands works well enough as alliteration. Hounding habits, however, suggests the image of pursuing hounds. What compelling commands would a pack of pursuing hounds utter? The only one I can imagine is halt and be eaten. Hounding habits is alliterative, but is not poetically so. These two H's deepen no mood, reinforce no compelling command. The only thing they do is suggest to the mind the need to pronounce them gaspingly. Pursued by these commands, most people have not yet been awakened by wisdom to walk its pleasant pathways. If you're running for your life, as must be assumed from the fact that you're being pursued by hounds, it is difficult to imagine how you can be asleep. Yet at this point, most people are described as not yet awakened. The image of awakening, moreover, and immediately afterwards of walking wisdom's pleasant ways, is too much of a mental stretch. First, I'm running for my life. Next, I'm being somehow awakened by wisdom. And finally, after managing to swallow that metaphor, I'm suddenly walking wisdom's pleasant pathways. It's just too much weight to accept without proper preparation. Where life is in danger for lack of watchfulness. Danger from what? From hounding habits, one assumes, but somehow these hounds have gone out of focus in the welter of intervening metaphors. Anyway, granting the reality of the hounds, what else am I supposed to watch out for to protect my life? Surely I'm well enough aware of the hounds at my heels to need no advice to watch out for them. One can, of course, figure it all out, but in the end, however, the effort costs the reader too much commitment to what he's reading. Where life is in danger from lack of watchfulness, it is not safe to sleep. If the danger to one's life makes it unsafe to sleep, the question of lack of awareness is quite secondary. The first safeguard surely is to be awake. Only when wakefulness has been accomplished does the possibility for watchfulness less become even an issue. So it is unwise, I'm quoting again, to slumber in the dark doorways of evil habits which invite the danger of possible death to wisdom and true happiness. Again, there I am, sleeping it all off, despite the fury of the chase. Assuming the presence of other death-dealing enemies besides those pursuing hounds, who of course know of my existence and probably know my actual whereabouts, I should have thought that the darker the doorway, the greater my chances of remaining undetected. Moreover, if I'm sleeping in dark doorways of evil habits, what wisdom and true happiness can I be hoarding that might be endangered? I should think my supposed wisdom and true happiness were pretty well dead already. The ordinary man, I'm quoting again, earns a living, eats 3 times a day, amuses himself with trivial entertainments, remaining engrossed, emphasis mine, in the mechanical performance of material duties. That gerund, remaining engrossed, modifies each of the 3 clauses before it. In other words, what is being said is, the ordinary man earns a living, remaining engrossed in the mechanical performance of material duties. Redundant. The ordinary man eats 3 times a day, remaining engrossed in the mechanical performance of material duties. Difficult to imagine how he accomplishes both tasks at once. The ordinary man amuses himself with trivial entertainments, remaining engrossed in the mechanical performance of material duties. Another contradiction in terms. The wise man gives up false pride in self-perfection. First, consider the expression false pride. Is there such a thing as true pride? Maybe, but it will have to be explained if the reader is not to be left mystified. The master uses this expression in his moral above, but the way he uses it is not really confusing. The mind even accepts, at least as a point on which to meditate, that the light of peace, master's term, may well destroy false pride. In the present context, however, confusion intervenes. Though only momentarily, I grant you, pride is a spiritual flaw. The goal in life is self-perfection. How is it, the mind wonders, that pride is being equated with self-perfection? The point is clarified a moment later by the explanation, the thought that I'm all right as I am. But by then the damage has already been done. The reader stops at this point of initial confusion and tries to work it all out before proceeding any further. The thought, moreover, I'm all right as I am, is not a definition of self-perfection on any level, not even in something as ordinary as learning to play tennis. Rather, it suggests merely the delusion of self-perfection. This is, of course, what makes a person's pride false. But how many readers are going to take the time to work all that out? Using the net of introspection, one thinks of introspection as incisive, not as something that one gathers in. Incisive suggests a sword, perhaps, the image master often used, or a knife. Using the net of introspection, he catches delusion and destroys it. How are we to visualize destroying something with a net? Nets are used for gathering in. Only after the gathering does any question of destruction arise. The reader is asked, however, not only to catch delusion with a net, but to use the same net to destroy it. For no other means are suggested to him to effect delusion's destruction. Thus he may visualize himself trying to use the net to clobber delusion to death. And so on. I sent this to Mrinalini Mata before she put out Wine and the Mystic, taking it from the magazine articles. She didn't take one suggestion. This is typical of their editing. And I have to emphasize that Master, when he told me you have a great work to do, first of all, he talked every time he talked in public. I never heard him fail to talk about communities. There was one lecture in which his subject was my visit to Assisi, which he pronounced Assisi. And he talked about communities. At the very end, he said, and so the thing is my visit to Assisi. But he talked so forcefully about it. He said, take this one, if there's one thing I can give you as advice, take this, buy land in the country, live for God with other people of like mind, live simply closer to God. And he talked about it with such power. And I, who at the age of 15 even had thought to start communities, naturally it was almost as if I was born with that mission. Now we can say that. Then I couldn't, but I certainly had that interest. And I said to Dayamata one day, when are we going to start these communities? Her answer in her exact words were, frankly, I'm not interested. Well, nor was William Rufus interested in doing his William's will, nor was Robert Curthose. They have a right to their misunderstanding, but Dayamata in that lifetime was a daughter that he sent to marry the Infanta, or the heir to the throne of Spain. And she decided her life was dedicated to God, and she did not want to become a queen. And when the ship arrived in Cadiz, I suppose, or whatever port it landed in, she was found kneeling by her bed, dead. And she told me that since then I've always had trouble with my knees. But the truth is that if you use any faculty for God, like a woman who had such beautiful hands that they were used for modeling photographs. And the Edgar Cayce told her that in her last life she had been a nun and used her hands to scrub the floor of her monastery kitchen. And so it is any faculty you give to God. In my last life, Brigu told me that I sang bhajans for many years. And I have a good voice in this life, though I certainly didn't prove it the other evening. Forgive me. But she has had trouble with her knees. That doesn't indicate that she did God's will in kneeling, even though she was found kneeling dead. But she felt she knew Master's will. She knew God's will better than her own father did, who was her guru. And in this life, she has shown that same tendency. She has built her work, not Master's work. She has built it in her way, and in a very feminine way. I have united the quality of feminine and masculine, but she never has. The women in SRF become matas. The men never become more than brothers. The women get to dress, as John Parsons said it, oriental. The men wear kurtas, but that's all. The men are second-class citizens, and Dayamata herself told me, not long after Master's passing, let's face it, women are more spiritual than men. So, you women have had trouble with that. I've had trouble from the other side. We've been second-class citizens. But I know, and I have demonstrated that here, that balance is a salutary thing, and that with the feminine and masculine energy, we have created a community that really is for Dwapara Yuga. And everything that Master taught, because I have had time in these intervening years to meditate on his work. And when I was put out of SRF, I could no longer do the work of SRF, and yet I was absolutely dedicated to doing Master's work. And I didn't want to create obstacles or competition. I wanted to build his work, but I didn't want to compete, and therefore I wanted to do something complementary. And since they had said they would not start communities, they weren't interested, I said, all right, that's what I will do. And since he had said that he wanted me to write books, and I had asked him, but sir, haven't you written all the books that are needed? And he said, don't say that. Much more is needed. And I thought, well, what can I write? And I realized that he had written how to achieve success, how to heal the body by affirmations, so many different things. He talked about how to have a harmonious marriage, how to raise children. He talked about all these things, even though he hadn't written books on the subject. And I realized that if I wrote books on these subjects, that would not conflict with anything they are doing, but it would help to show that his mission, like that of William the Conqueror, it was to an age, not just a particular kingship. And Master's mission was to Dwapara Yuga. He wanted to show how in Dwapara Yuga, everybody must learn to think in terms of energy. And he introduced this principle of energy into everything that we do, so that we learn how to heal our bodies through energy, so that we learn how to become successful in starting our bookstores, in writing my course on material success, in starting Ananda itself. I never allowed the success of Ananda to be my primary principle. Anybody else in my position would make that his bottom line. I did not. There were times when I threatened the very survival of Ananda by adhering to my principles. And it always survived because God wanted it to. But I only built Ananda to do God's will. And if it looked like it would fail, and there were several times when it looked as if failure was a virtual certainty, I said, no, God, I've done it for you. If you want it to succeed, you will make it succeed. But I will not take those moral shortcuts or spiritual shortcuts that anybody normally would do to protect my interest and my effort to what I've done. I've always adhered to Dharma. And I've always remembered that Sanskrit saying, Yata Dharmas Tata Jaya, or on the wall of the palace of Kuch Behar, Jato Dharma Tato Jaya. Where there is Dharma, there is victory. We have proved that it's true. And our victory has not been over anybody, but over ourselves. And every time we've had a serious test of pass, and have passed it, we've become stronger. It isn't that we've beaten anybody, but we've become strong enough to survive. And another principle that I have learned from this long life of mine, and from my experience with SRF, and all the struggles I went through in trying to create centers and so on, was that people are more important than any project, anything. When you start a project, don't use anybody. If it is good for the people involved, it will finally be good for what you're doing. But many times I have had to let something go because the people didn't understand, because they wouldn't do what I wanted. They weren't ready for it. For one reason or another, I have compromised, never giving up my central point, but always clinging to that same central point that I'm trying to build a community for God. I had to give up on the architecture. I wanted to build a community more like the architecture of Europe, where you find that the whole towns are in the same basic style. And it's charming. And since then, people have gone to Europe and seen what I meant and agreed, yes, this would have been beautiful. But instead, people here had been used to building their own style, and I said, let it go. You do it. I was trying to create the right spirit. And there were many times, it was not easy. I tell you, you young people now starting a new community will find it much easier in one very important respect, that we have a model. And we can tell people today, no, this isn't how we do it. But back then I couldn't say how we do it. I was creating how we do it. And so I had to give up on many points that I would not have given up on now, and do not give up on now. But I had to, in order to allow the whole thing to move forward. Now we have that system, And it's easier for young people coming in and starting a new community to say, well, no, this is not the Ananda way, and people coming will accept that. In the beginning, that was not so. I had to play the politician sometimes. There was one time when I had to gather the whole community together. First of all, there was a whole batch of people living at the farm here who said that they wanted to call me on the carpet for certain things I wasn't doing. Well, it was we who weren't doing it, but they were calling me on the carpet. So I beat them to the punch, and I called the whole community together. And I said, we are not doing certain things. What can we do to improve it? That took the wind out from under their sails. And we were able to think about it in a more progressive way. But I was so tired of this constant bickering and contrary energy. And I went to India for a rest and to get away from this fighting for a while. And when I came back, I found that Jim Barnhart and a few others had created a whole board of directors and bylaws to separate the farm from the meditation retreat. And one of their bylaws was that Swami Kriyananda will have no say in anything that we decide. I said, and Shivani, who was a student of law, had helped them to set up their bylaws of all things. Anyway, I had to say, I haven't started this place so you can take it over. I had to be very frank and very strong. I had to say that if you were to take this farm, it would fail within 6 months. 3 months for the foreclosure notice to be given to you, 3 more months for it to be foreclosed, and you'd be out on the street, because the money paying for this farm is coming from the meditation retreat. It's not coming from here. And you've read in my book, letters, in Divine Friendship, the letters I've written about this one person who wrote about all these wonderful, upstanding, creative, new thought people. I said, I have my own take on those new thought people. They're ready to jump down my neck every time I open my mouth to make a suggestion, and they're not willing to make a single suggestion of their own. All they've suggested is what we should not do. I said, I'm tired of that energy. And finally, I called a meeting. Somebody had given us money to build a publications building. And I thought that would be a beautiful building as a statement when you drive in. The first building you see, this new expression in architecture. And they created this big storm. I said, look, I gave you all the right to determine the zoning of our village. I said that was something important to me, but I let you decide it. And you've decided this is our industrial area. Now, we've got to accept that this is our industrial area. This is what I want. Oh, we don't want anybody making decisions, forcing us to make decisions in front of a bulldozer. I said, all right, you come up here, the ringleader of them. Come up here and tell me where you think the building should be. He told me exactly where it should be. It was obvious. Still, they said, no, we don't want to make decisions in front of a bulldozer, and there was this big fighting. Finally, but mind you, and this is where I had to play politics too, I knew I had the majority of people on my side. I wouldn't have called the meeting until then. But then I called the meeting, and I said, look, I'm absolutely fed up with this 1 horsepower energy. I don't often insist on things, but when I do, I expect to be listened to. And if you're not willing to accept that condition, I can turn my back on this community and never look back. It won't matter at all. I've built this community not for me, not for you, but for Master. And if you want it to be something else, take it over. I don't care. And I meant it, but I knew I would win because I had most people on my side. And we lost about 50 people at that time, but it was good riddance of bad rubbish, in my opinion. Because from then on, we have grown. No, it was not easy getting Ananda established. It takes a certain amount of maturity to be able to know how to lead. And I've had experiences of many lifetimes. And in this lifetime, I didn't begin till I was 41. So you young people, remember, it does take experience, but you do have this on your side. You don't have to worry about the basics. you can say this is how we do it. And if we follow that system, and if we keep this basic principle in play, I think that we have the power to change the face of this planet. I really do. Because just a few people living in the right way have an impact far beyond their evident influence. People come to us from China and Taiwan and India and all over, because what we are doing, having a group of people living together in kindness, this is what Master wanted. He didn't want a big organization with a mother church and rules. He did not want it. He told me, don't create too many rules, it destroys the spirit. I know that what we have is Master's legacy. I know that what we have is what Master wanted to bring to the fore in this world. And although I have this one big doubt, because he did try to create a monastery, and so far we're teetering on the edge still. But I do believe in monasteries, and I don't believe that their influence, and this is why the peace treaty last night was again so important, that its spirit was instilled of the monasteries not by rules, but by a wish for freedom inwardly. And if we can have monks who seek inner freedom, and if this can be the basic rule, then I definitely believe in it. I am true to my monastic vows for that reason. I have tested other ways, but I know this is for me. I want God, and I want to help other people to find God. Nothing else matters to me. And if we can have a group of monks and nuns who seriously have the same desire, I am all for it. But I have to go with the reality. And the basic reality so far has been such that I have to honor it, because I see that our ministers, although married, are far better than SRF's ministers. They have spirit, they have understanding, they have renunciation, and they are true renunciates at heart, because they're first. This is the problem Master encountered when he had these when he tried to start a community in Encinitas, that the married couples would unite with each other in the wrong. If he scolded one of them, the other would defend the spouse. Now I don't see that. Now I find that they are yata dharma tata jaya. Dharma is the more important thing. And even if they're married, they stick to that truth. This I believe is the pattern for the New Age. But I do want, and I do plead with you young people, if you feel that living for God only is your thing, I say it's a definitely good thing to do. Because in marriage you do have to take your partner into account. You do have to make compromises. You do have to say, well, okay, we won't do that because of this. If you're living only for God, you can think only He. And if you're thinking, for example, if I were married, I'd have to think, if I had a job in the world or anything like that, I'd have to think about my own survival. I'd have to think about my own security. I'd have to think about bringing my children up and putting them through college and so on. I don't have any of that. I can threaten my own life. I couldn't care less. I could threaten my success of Ananda even. It's not that I don't care, but I will sacrifice everything if I feel that that is what God wants. Because I can have His God supreme and absolute in my life. Now this is not easy for married people to have. I would urge you to think in those terms too. Because if you can live for God alone, remember, the purpose of it is inner freedom. Freedom to live only for God and to give yourselves to Him without the least desire, what's in it for me, or what about myself, or what about my family. Even though my family is Ananda, His will comes before everything else. And I feel at this stage of my life that I'm really getting ready to leave this body. I may be around a little longer, but who knows? I'm very happy at the thought of going. I want you all to know that, so that you don't have doctors going to heroic efforts to keep me alive. Because the only thing that matters to me is I have done a good job, and I'm grateful for it. And I look at all your faces, and I'm grateful. I see that the spirit that Master put into my hands, I have passed it on, and you are living that spirit. That is what Master came to bring into this world. Bring people who would live in Dwapara Yuga consciousness, putting energy before everything else, understanding that everything is a flow, that it won't come by fixed rules and fixed organizations and fixed forms, but in an understanding of the flow of reality. I have found that in that flow I can create in a way that I could never do if I had thought things through exactly. You will find the more you are in that flow, the more the Spirit will flow through you. This is what Ananda is all about. Ask me what Ananda will be in the future. I would say more of that flow, not specific things in specific places. But living with the Masters and living in that flow, this is what Sanatana Dharma really is all about. The true religion of the universe, as I said in Revelations of Christ, is Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion. It's the same religion in the most distant galaxy. It cannot be different because it all depends on everything having evolved out of the consciousness of spirit and everything needing to be withdrawn back into oneness with that spirit. Joy to all of you.